So sticking with the theme of Indigenous perspectives and Indigenous issues, we're now going to hear from Ben Collins. Ben, you can go ahead and share your slides as I introduce you.
All right, John, you got it.
Ben is also part of our Economics for the Anthropocene partnership. He's part of the fourth cohort in that program. Ben is a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Engineering at McGill University. He did his master's in applied science at the University of British Columbia. And today he's going to talk to us about the front lines of mineral development decisions, Indigenous communities. Ben, take it away.
Thank you very much. I would also like to acknowledge that McGill is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanakahega Nation are the custodians of these lands and waters. Montreal, or Tiohtià:ke, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today is home to a diverse population of Indigenous communities and other peoples. I use the word, or we use the word unceded, is important to note, because since there are no agreements or treaties that have transferred title with any Indigenous community to settler ownership, the land was occupied here without permission. So as I said, my name is Benjamin Collins, and I'm a PhD student in the Economics for the Anthropocene program. I also sit in the engineering department under the supervision of Dr. Mustafa Kumral. 3 years ago, I joined this community, and I really do want to thank Dr. Peter Brown for giving me the opportunity. I'm forever grateful. I've made amazing connections, and I've learned a lot. I'm happy to continue learning through this discussion. My research focuses on the impacts and implications of our decisions regarding mineral development and what that relationship will look like or should look like going forward. These decisions around mineral development have countless intersections and impacts and history with Indigenous communities. The discussions often happen at a local permitting level with Indigenous communities, but I also want to talk today and stretch our minds to think on a more global level, but also think on a local level as well, where we have to make trade-offs on the kinds of development we want or don't want, and the types of technologies or products we want to build. Now, in addition to that discussion in my research and its intersection with Indigenous communities, I'll also briefly discuss the types of questions and methods that might be needed going forward, but also I'm going to bring this talk on a more kind of personal level by talking about where I grew up and giving my lens and how that has played a role in my research. Now, I want to bring up this map. I find it's of my home province, British Columbia, but it shows the diversity of the communities in British Columbia, which is relatively unique across Canada. In British Columbia, there are over 270,000 Indigenous communities that make up 5.9% of the population, as compared to Quebec, where we are, which is only 2.3% of the population. So Vancouver, where I'm from, is also the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations communities. It is important to note that the term Indigenous communities, when we use the term Indigenous in the Canadian context, we're referring to not just First Nations, we refer to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. So in BC, 67% of the Aboriginal people are First Nations, 30% are Métis, and 1% are Inuit. For those communities live on and off reserves, and they live in urban and rural communities throughout BC. What is very interesting, what is different about BC as compared to the rest of Canada is that, again, similar to Quebec, there are no treaties that have ever been signed with First Nations communities. Land rights and consultations are continuing to be redefined through the Supreme Court cases such as Delgamuukw in 1997 and Chilcotin in 2014. Stemming from generations of cultural genocide and residential school systems, Indigenous communities in BC bear the scars from these impacts. Growing up in Vancouver and in British Columbia, you see these survivors in your community and the devastation of cultural genocide. There's no doubt that these communities have inspired and influenced my work. But well, not but, I found myself as a young engineer working in the mining industry. The mining industry as probably a lot of you know, has a global reach and a long history in Canada and BC. A lot of people with kind of a technical background in Canada end up working in the mining industry, as it gives a lot of opportunities. But very early on, it was apparent that there are some major issues with mining and our metals usage: soil degradation, water contamination, acid rock drainage, greenhouse gas emissions, and total ecosystem devastation. In addition, local communities are extremely impacted as they are the custodians of that area. This is a picture of the Faro mine, which is in the Yukon Territory north of BC, which operated for, I believe, 20 years. I have to double check that, but now has become a $1 billion environmental liability. Unfortunately, this is one of many examples across Canada, and there are examples of this in all over the world and every continent. But the question is, so do we need metals? But as we push towards green technologies, there will still be a significant requirement for these mined materials and metals. Agriculture, as for example, has many mined requirements. Fertilizers, for example, require mined materials such as potassium and phosphorus. I personally don't see how our relationship with metals will ever cease to exist, but it definitely has to reorient itself. So in regards to Indigenous communities in Canada, there are some improvements, but it's generally a history of being excluded and ignored from decisions. Indigenous communities are now starting to see company community agreements, such as impact benefit agreements, which is a step in the right direction, but there's a long way to go to bring the wants and needs and what is possible from the mining community together. The environmental assessment process is more open to Indigenous communities, but but the communities still bear the scars of previous operations not including them at all. Many communities and individuals are divided by the development, by mineral development. They are divided by the opportunities the mines provide, but its impacts on their traditional ways of life. A lot of the highest paid jobs at the mine still don't go to Indigenous communities, and a lot of the benefits leave the community. When a mine leaves, the community is generally left with the major risks done by the mining. Mine closure and reclamation planning is a key area of my research, and is an important question, and I guess it really brings all the issues of mining down to what it is. It asks the questions of what the mine closure is, the work that is done after a mine has completed, and it's the work to bring it back to a quote unquote usable site. And so that planning and that work can align to the wants and needs of the community. But the problem is there are lots of technical constraints with the way we close mines, and that has to do with the way we make and develop mines. The way we close mines is based on the way we mine, and our mining practices are so environmentally destructive, it's impossible to close mines. We need a reorient and bringing together of, if we are deciding we want to mine or use resources, we need to reorient the way we mine to ensure that we can close it and bring it back for a useful land use with the communities. The communities, again, are the land stewards. They don't leave. The mining company leaves. They're the ones that are left with the risks, and they have to be they have to be collaborated with, and they have to be the rights holders. They are the rights holders of the land. Now, so what have I been doing? This is a very, very scary diagram. I know this is kind of what methods exist to make these decisions. How do we incorporate different communities, different stakeholders, different decision-making methods? I've been researching this multi-criteria decision-making, environmental management systems. I've also been looking at game theory to understand conflicts amongst different stakeholder groups. I apologize for this this horrible mess. I've shown this to a couple people, and they say, "Wow, this is." I'm going to say this as this is a compliment and also a and not a compliment, that this is a classic what an engineering professor would do and confuse people with. So I apologize for that, but it's kind of where we're at with all these decision-making frameworks. But the biggest takeaway is these methods have to be collaborative. They have to be incorporate Indigenous communities. They have to incorporate indicators that collaborate and are developed by local Indigenous communities. But so as I said, with the technical constraints, even bringing these indicators and decisions for communities together, there's still a long way to go for innovation and developing better technologies that are actually aligned to a more sustainable future. So looking at that at a local level, I always am asking myself, or always trying to bring in the bigger questions of mineral development. So if we're looking at a permitting level, that kind of decision-making framework, or blob of a diagram, which I showed you guys, but the overarching questions are, can we use metals and respect ecological thresholds on both a local and global level? What are the ends and means of this mined material? What are we using it for? Is it really bringing us to more sustainable futures? Is it getting us away from energy use using fossil fuels? Is it bringing us to green electricity? What is the energy required to produce this material? Can we get it from recycling methods? What is that trade-off? And again, and then finally, the stock's size and durability. What's its ability to be able to be recycled? How much do we have of it left? What are the impacts of that? The big thinking needs to come down to a local level of deciding if we want to mine, what products were being used. So on a local level, I like to think on these global questions as well in my research, or I do. So with all that being said, I want to take you to I want to take you to a case study, a project in northern. I've been looking at a few different case studies, a few different mines on a local level, and I'm going to be taking you up far north into the Meadowbank complex, which is in Nunavut, as you see, kind of highlighted in I guess orange there, near the Baker Lake community. So, mining in Nunavut is no simple task. First of all. Due to climate change has made mining and construction very difficult and very expensive. These mines require permafrost to be built on, but permafrost layers are shrinking and shrinking, making it very difficult to build any type of mine infrastructure. The ice road season is getting shorter and shorter. They have to truck in materials from more southern communities through these frozen lakes and rivers. That season's getting shorter. And these mines are almost completely run off of burning diesel fuel, which has a huge greenhouse gas emission. So the mining with that being said, operations for this gold mine started in 2010, March of 2010, and it's nearby Baker Lake. Now, Nunavut is, the majority of Nunavut is of Inuit descent, 84% of the population, who are recently seeing mineral development and what it brings in terms of economic opportunities, but also disruptions to land, culture, land, and way of life. And Inuit, so I was talking about impact benefit agreements earlier, the company community agreements that are now starting to take place. So an impact benefit agreement was signed with the Kavalik Inuit Association for local employment, training, business development, and the mine was accepted by I guess the leadership of the community and the general community, from the things I'm reading. Now the mines do provide communities with opportunities, but as I said, can greatly disrupt traditional ways of life and cultural economies that are closely attached to land and are generally preferred. The work at these mines is a 2-week in, 2-week out schedule. And so you get people away from their families for 2 weeks, away from their ways of life. And it can be a big impact on the social structures of these remote communities. And even with even where we are now, even with these opportunities and economic growth from mineral development, there still continues to be significant social issues in these northern communities in Quebec. There are very sad and grim statistics for the communities out there on poverty, education, teen pregnancy, suicide rate, and food insecurity. These are amongst the lowest rates in Canada. And when I didn't want to go over all of them because it's really shocking and disturbing, honestly. So future development and plans in Nunavut are often faced with these failures of our government and of our communities. We need development and work that actually strengthens traditional economies and promotes Inuit culture. So with all that, I was bringing you to kind of like a local, then a global, then back to a local scale, kind of pushing you back and forth with this presentation. But some action. Now, what do we do? Some actionable outcomes. A big thing is promoting of Indigenous community education and training. Indigenous communities, as I said, are on these front lines. They're making these decisions. They have to make these trade-offs for their community, these struggling communities, for how they want to advance, but also respect their traditional ways of life. We need to promote education so they have the capacity and ability to make these decisions, the best decisions for their community. Protecting, respecting, and celebrating Indigenous community culture. I challenge everyone to read about the history of your local Indigenous communities or communities that you're working with. Really, it's amazing the history of some and sad history of some of these communities, but it's important for us to do. It's imperative for us to do. On a mining level, we need to push for transparent reporting of environmental impacts. Looking at a lot of these mines, and if we want to have mines in certain ways, it's almost impossible to tell through reporting where are we going to say if we want to have green electricity or where are we going to source where's the best place to source lithium? Where's the best place to source rare earth metals? Where's the best place to source lithium? It's impossible to tell where we can align on a global level for better environmental outcomes. We need bold goals for mineral development. We need bold goals for innovation. If we are going to choose to go about our economies in mineral development, we need to go away from such destructive mineral development practices and pushing for better greener electricity sources, better mine closure practices, mining practices that are able to bring better closure outcomes. And we need to look at, and then on a global level, we need to look at the entire life cycle analysis of these products we're mining and what they're being used for. So, bringing that together, my final thoughts, our rate for metals, our consumption rate of metals is increasing as well as our energy required per unit of metal. So that means that we're getting lower and lower, our resources are lower and lower in terms of grade. And so our tonnages are going up and our mines are becoming more and more and more destructive because they're getting bigger and bigger. So with that, we need a major shift of consumption and lifestyle values for living symbiotically with our planet. There's no question about that. And Indigenous communities need support and resources for making these decisions and processes on the front line. And so we need to push for better decision-making processes and more collaborative approaches that, and as Alice says, non-Western narratives of decision-making, collaborative decision-making, and promoting capacity in these communities. I thank you very much. This is a picture of some of my time of Kamloops, where I worked for my master's, and it really put me on this path of working more and more with Indigenous communities. And I thank the Kamloops to Secwepemc community for continuing my support of my research. Thank you very much.